The first thing I saw when I walked into that conference room was his name, printed right where mine should have been. 10 years ago, Mason Burke humiliated me in front of half the town. Now, he was smiling at the head of the table, introducing my project as his vision. My hands were trembling, but my voice was steady. "You really want to do this again, Mason?" He smirked, the same arrogant curl of his lips I remembered from senior year. "Relax, Charlotte," he said. "It's just business." I wish he had said anything else, because that was the moment I decided. This time, I wouldn't bow. I would make him kneel. The applause hit like gunfire. Mason Burke stood at the front of the room, his voice smooth and confident as he gestured toward the screen behind him. "Our new brand campaign, Reforged Valor, is a tribute to our veterans, to those who served, and to the families who supported them through every deployment and homecoming." On the screen were my words, my design, my research. Every single element I had spent 3 months perfecting, now presented under his name as though he had conceived it himself. The color scheme I had agonized over, the tagline I had rewritten 17 times, the veteran testimonials I had personally collected, all of it was there, glowing on that massive screen. My chest tightened as people around the table nodded approvingly and clapped for him. Junior executives leaned forward, taking notes. The marketing director smiled like she had just witnessed brilliance. Mason's eyes swept across the room, drinking in their admiration before landing on me in the back corner. He winked. That single gesture sent ice through my veins. He knew exactly what he was doing. He knew I had created every slide, every word, every concept. And he knew I would stay silent, just like I had 10 years ago when he destroyed my life the first time. But he was wrong about one thing. I was not that girl anymore. My fingers curled under the table, nails digging into my palms hard enough to leave marks. 10 years ago, I would have stood up and screamed. I would have called him out in front of everyone, my voice shaking with rage and tears streaming down my face. I would have made a scene that people would whisper about for weeks. But I had learned, pain teaches you things that comfort never can. Now I simply smiled. "Great job, Mason," I said evenly, though my throat burned like I had swallowed broken glass. My voice was calm, almost cheerful, the tone of someone genuinely impressed by a colleague's work. He thought I was beaten. He thought I had learned my place, that I understood how things worked in his world. He saw a woman who had been taught a lesson about who gets credit and who stays quiet. What he did not see was the storm gathering behind my eyes. He did not see the list I had been building for 6 months. He did not see the recordings, the documents, the carefully collected evidence, sitting in 3 separate cloud accounts under 3 separate names. He thought he was stealing my legacy again. He had no idea I was letting him hang himself with his own rope. After the meeting ended, I walked to the window on the 14th floor and stared out at Colorado Springs stretching below. The mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still dusted with early snow. My reflection stared back at me in the glass, older than I remembered, harder around the edges, but still recognizably me. 10 years of shame, I whispered to myself, my breath fogging the cold window. The words felt heavy in my mouth, weighted with every sleepless night, every job I had worked just to survive, every time I had seen his face in the news and felt that old wound tear open again. But shame was not the only thing I had carried for 10 years. I had also carried rage. And rage, when properly channeled, when given enough time to mature and plan, becomes something far more dangerous than anger. It becomes justice. "And the warrior's daughter is back to collect interest," I finished, my voice steady now. My father had taught me that debts always come due. Some people pay in cash, others pay in consequences. Mason Burke was about to learn which currency I preferred. "My name is Charlotte Slott. I am 31 years old, and I am a brand strategist at Sentinel Defense Manufacturing, a small but rising company that produces equipment for military contracts. But 10 years ago, I was someone completely different. I was Charlotte Quinn, the only daughter of Colonel James Quinn, a decorated officer who had served 3 tours overseas and come home with more medals than stories he was willing to tell. I had been the pride of my university's ROTC program. I had been engaged to my high school sweetheart. I had been accepted to officer candidate school with a full scholarship. My future had been a straight line pointing toward service, honor, and everything my father had taught me to value. And then I met Mason Burke. He had been a classmate, 2 years older than me, but still finishing his degree after taking time off. He was magnetic in the way that dangerous people often are, charming, confident, always knowing exactly what to say to make you feel special. We had been assigned to the same leadership project, and somewhere between late-night study sessions and shared ambitions, I had made the mistake of trusting him. I had told him things I had never told anyone. Private fears, private dreams, private messages I thought would stay between us. I had been naive enough to believe that sharing yourself with someone meant they would protect those pieces of you. I had been so incredibly wrong. The day everything fell apart started like any other. I woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. My roommate was standing in my doorway, her face pale, holding her phone like it was contaminated. "Charlotte, what did you do?" she whispered. I did not understand the question. I had not done anything. But apparently, Mason had. He had taken our private messages, conversations where I had vented about ROTC politics, questioned certain instructors, admitted doubts about whether I was ready for officer candidate school, and leaked them to the entire ROTC program email list the night before a major leadership evaluation. By the time I arrived on campus, everyone had seen them. The messages were printed out and taped to walls. People whispered as I walked past. My instructors looked at me with disappointment that cut deeper than anger ever could. My fiancé broke off our engagement in the parking lot, saying he could not be with someone who did not respect the program. The scholarship I had worked 4 years to earn was revoked that afternoon. My acceptance to officer candidate school was withdrawn pending a character review that never happened because I withdrew my application first. I could not stand the thought of defending myself when the evidence of my own words was right there for everyone to judge. And Mason? He stood in the back during my final ROTC formation, watching me be dismissed from the program I loved. He did not even have the decency to look away. That night, I sat across from my father at dinner. He had driven 3 hours from his base to our town the moment he heard. The silence between us was worse than any lecture could have been. Colonel James Quinn was a man of few words, but his presence spoke volumes. His disappointment filled the room like smoke, making it hard to breathe. Finally, he set down his fork. His hands were steady, but I could see the tension in his jaw. "You'll rebuild," he said. His voice cracked with something that might have been hurt or might have been grief. But not here, not where everyone will remind you of this every single day. He was right. I could not stay in a town where I had become the cautionary tale people told to warn others about trusting the wrong person. I could not walk past the campus where I had once belonged and now was barred. I could not face the people who had watched me fall and done nothing to help me up. So I packed that night. 2 suitcases, my laptop, and the small box of my father's medals he had given me when I earned my ROTC acceptance. "These represent honor," he had said then. "Never forget what that means." I left town before sunrise, driving west with no destination in mind. Just away. Always away. The next 10 years were a blur of survival. I worked retail in Nevada. I waitressed in Oregon. I did temp work at corporate offices in California. Always moving, always using my mother's maiden name, Slot, instead of Quinn, because I could not bear the thought of my father's name being connected to my shame. But during those years, I also watched. Every time Mason Burke's name appeared in the news, I read the article. When he launched his startup focused on veteran services, I studied every press release. When he sold that company and became CEO of Sentinel Defense Manufacturing, I tracked his rise like a general studying an enemy's movements. He built his empire on the backs of people like me. Veterans, military families, people who believed in service. He used our stories, our sacrifices, our language of honor, and twisted it all into profit margins and investor presentations. He became the face of veteran-focused business while paying his workers minimum wage and funneling bonus money into his own accounts. The more successful he became, the more I felt that old wound ache. But I was not just watching out of bitterness. I was learning. I was understanding how he operated, what weaknesses he had hidden beneath that polished exterior. And finally, after a decade of preparation, I applied to work at his company. I submitted my application under Charlotte Slot, my mother's maiden name. I had changed more than just my name in 10 years. I had changed my appearance, my confidence, my entire way of moving through the world. The broken girl who had fled town in shame had been replaced by a woman who knew exactly what she was worth. Mason interviewed me himself. He sat across from me in his corner office, all glass walls and expensive furniture, and studied my resume with interest. "Impressive background," he said. "Brand strategy for 3 Fortune 500 companies. Why do you want to work here?" "Because I believe in what you're building," I lied smoothly. "Supporting veterans and their families, that matters to me on a personal level." He leaned back in his chair, a small smile playing at his lips. "You remind me of someone I used to know," he said thoughtfully. "Someone who also thought they could change the world." My pulse quickened, but I kept my expression neutral. "I hope I exceed their example," I replied. He hired me on the spot. And just like that, I was inside his empire, ready to watch it burn from within. The first month was observation. I learned the office dynamics quickly, who had real power, who was just Mason's favorite of the week, who actually did the work while others took credit. It was a familiar pattern. I kept my head down and exceeded every expectation. When Mason's pet project fell behind schedule, I stayed late and fixed the problems his team had created through incompetence. When a client presentation needed emergency revisions, I rewrote the entire thing overnight. When numbers did not add up in quarterly reports, I quietly corrected them before anyone else noticed. I became indispensable without ever seeming to compete. The office started turning to me for solutions, and I gave them freely. I was helpful, capable, and invisible in all the ways that mattered. But Mason noticed. Of course he did. Men like him always notice when someone starts out shining their carefully crafted image. His compliments, which had been genuine at first, turned patronizing. "Good work, Charlotte," he would say, but with that edge that suggested he was surprised I had managed it. He started hovering behind my desk, correcting details he did not understand. He would schedule meetings right before deadlines, wasting my time with pointless discussions while I fell behind. He introduced me to clients as part of my team in a way that erased my individual contributions, and I logged every single interaction in a private document only I could access. The breaking point came at a client dinner 3 months into my employment. Mason had invited me along to meet with a potential military contractor, a retired general who could bring millions in business to Sentinel. I had spent weeks preparing the pitch, researching the general's priorities, crafting talking points that would resonate with his values. We sat in an expensive steakhouse downtown, the kind with leather booths and dim lighting. The general asked intelligent questions about our veteran hiring practices, our commitment to quality, our understanding of military culture. I answered each one precisely because I had written the policies he was asking about. But Mason interrupted constantly, rephrasing my answers as though I had not been clear enough, taking credit for initiatives I had launched. And then, when the general asked who had prepared such a thorough presentation, Mason smiled and said, "Charlotte's my assistant. She's very good at following instructions." The word assistant hung in the air like poison. The general's respect cooled immediately. An assistant was not a strategist. An assistant did not have authority. An assistant's ideas were really her boss's ideas, just transcribed. I swallowed my humiliation and smiled politely through the rest of dinner. But inside, something crystallized. Mason had not just stolen my work. He had stolen my credibility, my voice, my right to exist in that room as an equal. The daughter of a warrior does not fight angry. She fights prepared. That night, I started building my real case. I had been collecting evidence casually before, but now I became methodical. I created a system of documentation that would hold up under any scrutiny. I started with the financial irregularities I had noticed while fixing those quarterly reports. Money moving through accounts that did not match the official ledgers. Bonuses paid to consultants who did not seem to exist. Expense reports for veteran outreach events that showed inflated costs that never actually materialized into the programs Mason claimed to run. I found duplicate invoices buried in archived files. I discovered a shell company registered under Mason's brother's name that received regular payments for consulting services with no documentation of what those services were. I uncovered grant applications to veteran programs where Mason claimed company contributions that our actual books did not reflect. None of it was individually damning. Taken alone, each piece could be explained as administrative error or creative accounting. But together, they painted a picture of systematic fraud, of a man who had built his reputation on supporting veterans while actually exploiting their goodwill for personal profit. I organized everything, chronologically. I cross-referenced dates and amounts. I backed up copies in 3 separate secure locations. This was not about revenge anymore. This was about justice. Mason started inviting me to brainstorm sessions in his office after hours. Just the 2 of us, he would say, so we could think creatively without the team's distractions. I knew what he was really doing, trying to take ownership of ideas before I could present them to anyone else. One evening, he leaned back in his expensive leather chair, tie loosened, glass of bourbon in hand. "You know, Charlotte, you could learn a lot from me," he said, that familiar arrogance coloring his voice. "I've built this company from nothing. I know how to navigate this industry." "I'm sure you do," I replied neutrally, my phone sitting face down on the table between us, recording every word through an app he did not know existed. "The key is understanding that rules are really just guidelines," he continued, emboldened by my silence. "Take these veteran grants, for example. Everyone thinks you have to spend every dollar exactly as specified. But if you're smart about it, if you know how to massage the numbers..." He kept talking, confessing without realizing it. His ego demanded an audience, and I gave him one. I nodded at the right moments. I asked clarifying questions that made him elaborate. I let him believe I was impressed by his cleverness. "Even the Pentagon's blind when they need us," he finished, draining his glass. "They want to believe we're the good guys, so they don't look too closely at the details." I smiled. "That's fascinating, Mason. You've really mastered the system." He had just handed me everything I needed. That night, I sat in my apartment and listened to the recording 3 times. His voice filled my small living room, each word another nail in the coffin he was building for himself. The arrogance, the pride, the casual admission that he was defrauding the very people he claimed to serve. 10 years ago, he had used my words to destroy me. He had taken my private thoughts, things I had shared in trust, and weaponized them to ruin my reputation and my future. He had made me into a cautionary tale, a joke, someone people pointed to as an example of poor judgment. Now, his own words would undo him. There was a poetry to it that I found deeply satisfying. I exported the audio file, encrypted it, and added it to my growing archive of evidence. Then I created a presentation that would display everything: the financial irregularities, the fake consultants, the grant fraud, and finally, this recording where Mason Burke admitted to it all in his own voice. All I needed now was the right moment, the right audience, the right stage where the fall would be public enough to match the humiliation he had given me. And I knew exactly when that moment would be. The company's 10-year anniversary gala was 6 weeks away. Mason had been planning it for months, treating it like his coronation. He had invited government representatives, potential investors, military leadership, and press from every major business publication. It would be his moment to announce the massive defense contract he had been negotiating, a deal worth $50 million that would cement his reputation as a titan of the veteran business community. He talked about it constantly. "This gala will change everything," he told the executive team during strategy meetings. "We'll be untouchable after this. The biggest name in ethical defense manufacturing." Ethical. The word tasted like ash every time he said it. "I volunteered to help with the presentation technology. I want to make sure everything runs smoothly," I told him. "No technical problems on your big night." He patted my shoulder like I was a helpful child. "That's why I hired you, Charlotte. You're reliable. Reliable, helpful, invisible. All the things he wanted me to be." What he did not know was that I was programming a backup presentation into the system. One that only I could unlock with a specific command. One that would override whatever Mason tried to show on that stage. The gala would change everything. just not in the way he imagined. As the gala approached, I started having doubts. Late at night, lying in bed and staring at the ceiling, I questioned whether I was really ready to do this. Exposing Mason meant exposing myself to scrutiny again. It meant attention, questions, people digging into my past and discovering who I really was. The last time I had been the center of attention, it had destroyed me. What if this went wrong? What if people blamed me somehow? What if Mason managed to twist the narrative the way he had before, making himself the victim and me the vindictive ex-employee? I reached for the small wooden box on my nightstand. Inside were my father's medals: Silver Star, Bronze Star, Purple Heart. I held the Silver Star up to the moonlight coming through my window, studying its weight in my palm. My father had earned this for valor, for doing the right thing even when it was dangerous, for standing firm when others would have run. Courage isn't the absence of fear, he had told me once when I was young. It's persistence through it. It's doing what's right even when your hands are shaking. I closed my fingers around the medal. My hands were shaking now, but I would persist anyway. I started dropping careful hints to the right people. Nothing direct. I was not stupid enough to make accusations I could not yet prove publicly. But I asked questions. Innocent, curious questions that made certain people start noticing patterns they had missed. To the compliance officer, I was reviewing some old expense reports for reference, and I noticed these consulting fees. Do we have documentation for those services? To the accounting department, these grant numbers seem different from what's in our public reports. Is that normal? To HR, how do we verify that contractor payments are going to legitimate businesses? Each question was a seed planted. I never said Mason was doing anything wrong. I just highlighted inconsistencies and let other people's suspicions grow naturally. Within 2 weeks, Mason was sweating in meetings. He started snapping at people who asked about financial details. He held closed-door sessions with his executive team. He was feeling pressure from multiple directions and could not figure out where it was coming from. Good. I wanted him nervous. I wanted him making mistakes. Desperate people do stupid things. 3 weeks before the gala, Mason called me into his office. His usual charm was gone, replaced by barely controlled frustration. "Someone's been asking questions," he said without preamble, "poking around in things that don't concern them. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you, Charlotte?" I met his eyes without flinching. "Questions about what?" "Don't play stupid," he snapped. "Financial records, contractor payments, grant allocations. Someone's trying to make me look bad right before the biggest moment of my career." I tilted my head slightly, as if confused. "Funny, Mason. I thought making you look bad would be difficult when you've built such an ethical company. Unless there's something to find?" His jaw clenched. "You wouldn't want to jeopardize your future here. Remember what happened last time someone crossed me?" There it was. The threat. The reminder that he had destroyed me before and could do it again. He wanted me to remember my place, to recall how easily he had turned my world to ash 10 years ago. But I was not that frightened girl anymore. "I remember perfectly," I said quietly. "I remember every single detail." His eyes narrowed at something in my tone, some edge he could not quite identify, but he dismissed it. Men like Mason always underestimate the people they have hurt. The gala was held at the Broadmoor, the most expensive venue in Colorado Springs. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, ice sculptures shaped like eagles. Mason had spared no expense because this was his monument to himself. I arrived early, wearing a simple black dress that let me blend into the background. I checked the presentation system one final time, making sure my override program was properly installed and hidden. Everything was perfect. Mason would start his presentation, and exactly 3 minutes in, I would switch to my version. The room filled quickly. Government officials in dress uniforms, investors in expensive suits, military leadership wearing their medals and decorations, press photographers positioning themselves for the best angles. Everyone who mattered in the defense and veteran business community was here. Mason worked the room like a politician, shaking hands and telling jokes. He was in his element, confident and charismatic. I watched him from the back, my tablet hidden in my bag, and felt nothing but cold certainty. This was his last perfect moment. After tonight, everything would be different. At 8 o'clock, the lights dimmed. Mason took the stage to thunderous applause. 10 years ago, I founded Sentinel Defense Manufacturing with a simple mission. Mason began, his voice projecting perfectly through the sound system. To honor those who served by providing them with opportunities, support, and recognition they deserve. The screen behind him showed the company logo, then transitioned to images of veterans working on factory floors, smiling for promotional photos. Mason had staged specifically for moments like this. Tonight, I'm proud to announce that we've secured a $50 million contract with the Department of Defense, he continued, pausing for applause. This partnership represents validation of our commitment to excellence and integrity. Integrity. The word hung in the air, hollow and false. I pulled out my tablet, my finger hovered over the override command. Mason was approaching minute 3 of his presentation, exactly where I had planned the switch. Our success is built on transparency, Mason said, clicking to his next slide. On honest business practices and unwavering dedication to. I pressed the button. The screen flickered. Mason's carefully crafted slides vanished, replaced by a simple title, The Truth About Sentinel Defense Manufacturing. Mason's voice faltered. He turned to look at the screen, confusion crossing his face. He clicked his remote. Nothing changed. The next slide appeared. Bank records, highlighted transactions, money moving through shell companies. Gasps rippled through the audience. Mason stabbed at his presentation remote frantically, but I had locked him out completely. The slides continued, each one more damning than the last. Duplicate invoices showing inflated costs. Grant applications claiming veteran programs that never happened. Consulting payments to companies that did not exist. Side-by-side comparisons of what Mason told investors versus what the actual books showed. And then, the audio file. Mason's voice filled the ballroom through every speaker. The key is understanding that rules are really just guidelines. Everyone thinks you have to spend every dollar exactly as specified, but if you're smart about it, if you know how to massage the numbers, even the Pentagon's blind when they need us. The silence in that ballroom was deafening. 500 people sat frozen watching Mason Burke's empire disintegrate in real time on a screen 20 feet tall. Mason's face had gone white. He looked out at the audience, at the government officials whose trust he had betrayed, at the investors whose money he had misused, at the veterans whose goodwill he had exploited. Then he looked toward the back of the room, scanning for the source of his downfall. His eyes found mine. I held his gaze. I did not smile. I did not need to. My expression said everything. I remember. I waited. And now you pay. I did not stay to watch him try to explain. I did not need to see security escort him off stage or witness the government representatives storming out. I had already won. I walked out of the Broadmoor into the cold November night. The air hit my lungs like a baptism, clean and sharp and real. Behind me, I could hear raised voices and chaos erupting inside the ballroom, but it felt distant now, like something happening to someone else. For 10 years, I had carried the weight of Mason's betrayal. For 10 years, I had been the punchline of his success story, the naive girl who trusted the wrong person. For 10 years, my shame had been his stepping stone. But shame works both ways. And tonight, I had returned it to its rightful owner. I got into my car and drove home, windows down despite the cold, letting the mountain air rush through. My phone buzzed constantly with messages and calls, but I ignored them all. This moment belonged to me, and I wanted to feel every second of it in silence. When I finally arrived at my apartment, I poured a glass of wine and sat by the window, watching the city lights sparkle below. Somewhere out there, Mason Burke was learning that debts always come due, that the people you hurt remember, that justice delayed is not justice denied. The fallout moved faster than I expected. By Monday morning, Mason's resignation was leaked to every major news outlet. The headlines were brutal. Defense CEO exposed for grant fraud. Veteran-focused company built on lies. Audio recording reveals systematic fraud at Sentinel Manufacturing. The board of directors released a statement announcing Mason's immediate termination, pending a full federal investigation. The $50 million government contract was suspended indefinitely. Investors were filing lawsuits. The Attorney General's office opened a criminal probe. Everything Mason had built over 10 years vanished in 72 hours. His reputation was destroyed beyond repair. His professional network abandoned him. The business empire he had constructed on the backs of veterans and their families was being dismantled piece by piece. And through it all, my involvement remained anonymous. The press reported that an unnamed whistleblower had provided evidence to the authorities. Company insiders speculated about who had access to such detailed financial records, but no one suspected the quiet brand strategist who had only been there 8 months. No one except the people who mattered: the compliance officer who had helped verify my evidence, the accounting team who had confirmed my findings, the board members who had thanked me privately for my courage in exposing the truth. I had dismantled Mason's empire without ever attaching my name to his destruction. 2 weeks after the gala, I received a call from Hamilton and Associates, one of Sentinel's biggest competitors. The CEO, Patricia Hamilton, wanted to meet for coffee. We sat in a quiet cafe downtown. Patricia was in her 60s, a retired Army colonel who had built her company on genuine principles rather than marketing lies. She studied me carefully over her coffee cup. "I know it was you," she said simply. I did not deny it. "I assume this conversation is confidential." "Completely. I wanted to tell you that what you did took extraordinary courage." She paused. "And I wanted to offer you a position, Director of Strategic Initiatives, full creative control. Your real name on every project." "My real name?" I repeated carefully. She smiled. "Charlotte Quinn, daughter of Colonel James Quinn, one of the finest officers I ever served with. Did you think I wouldn't recognize you once I started looking?" My breath caught. After 10 years of hiding, of using my mother's maiden name, of carefully constructing a wall between my past and present, someone had seen through it all. "Your father would be proud," Patricia continued. "You didn't just expose fraud. You protected the integrity of our industry. You honored what military service actually means." I accepted her offer that afternoon. For the first time in a decade, I would work under my real name. The day before I started my new position, I drove to the National Cemetery where my father was buried. Colonel James Quinn had died 2 years ago, and I had missed his funeral because I could not bear the thought of facing people who remembered my disgrace. But I was not disgraced anymore. I knelt at his headstone, my fingers tracing the engraved letters of his name. The morning sun cast long shadows across the perfectly aligned rows of white markers, each one representing a life of service. "I paid the debt, Dad," I whispered. "Mason Burke hurt me, but he hurt something bigger too. He used the language of honor to commit fraud. He exploited veterans' trust for profit." And I stopped him. The wind moved through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and mountain air. I like to imagine it was my father's way of responding, of telling me he understood. From my bag, I pulled out a small frame containing the first byline I would publish under my real name, an industry article about ethical practices in defense contracting, scheduled to run next month. I leaned it against his headstone. "I'm Charlotte Quinn again," I said. "Not because I'm proud of what happened 10 years ago, but because I'm proud of what I did with it. I rebuilt. And in rebuilding, I became stronger than the person who broke me." My first day at Hamilton and Associates felt like returning home after a long exile. Patricia introduced me to the leadership team as Charlotte Quinn, and my name, my real name, was printed on business cards, on the office directory, on every document I produced. Reporters started calling, asking for interviews about the strategist who exposed the Sentinel fraud. I declined most of them, but agreed to one piece for a military veterans magazine. They titled it "Honor Restored: How One Woman Protected an Industry." The article never mentioned Mason by name. It focused instead on the importance of whistleblowers, on the courage required to stand up to corruption, on the responsibility we all share to protect the institutions we claim to serve. 2 months after I started my new job, I received an email from an address I did not recognize. The subject line read, "Thank you." Inside was a message from a veteran who had applied for grant assistance through Sentinel Manufacturing. "Because of what you exposed, the government recovered funds that Mason had stolen. That money is now going to actual veterans programs. My family is getting the support we were promised. You saved us." I read the email 3 times, then printed it and hung it on my office wall. True vengeance is not about destruction. It is about restoration, restoring honor, restoring justice, restoring the balance that was broken. 10 years ago, Mason Burke taught me a cruel lesson about shame. But in learning that lesson, I discovered something he never understood. That shame loses its power when you stop running from it. That the people who hurt you are counting on your silence. That the daughter of a warrior does not forget dishonor. She collects interest, and when the debt comes due, she makes sure everyone knows exactly what was owed. I stood at my office window, looking out at the mountains in the distance. The peaks were covered in snow, beautiful and unmovable, exactly as they had been 10 years ago when I fled this city in disgrace. But I was not the same person who left. I had been broken and reformed, shamed and restored. I had learned that sometimes the longest path to justice is the only one worth taking. And as I turned back to my desk, ready to build something lasting under my own name, I smiled. Because Mason Burke had tried to destroy me twice, once with my own words and once with my own work. But both times I had survived. And survival, I learned, is its own form of victory. The warrior's daughter had collected her interest. Now it was time to invest it in something better.